Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. I often get my guests from other podcasts. I steal them. And I saw the man on the screen, Ted Flynn. I'd seen him on a show, U.S. Grace Force, as a matter of fact. They have some fantastic guests. And what Ted Flynn had to offer on Garabandal was very, very powerful. The man is not, I'm not allowed to call him an expert because I'm not allowed, but he is a person who has studied for over 4 decades, Garabandal. And in addition, he is a prolific writer. I could tell you all of his important parts about his bio, but I was looking at the books that he has written in the past 20, 30 years, and every single one of them were books that were leading to, for me, such a time as this. Beginning with, in 1993, I looked The Thunder of Justice, the major apparitions of the Blessed Mother in world history. That's already been translated into 7 languages. And so that was just a beginning. Hope of the Wicked, The Master Plan to Rule the World, which was a bestseller before. And so I move into, because I'm not going to read all of the books that he's written, though I do think you should look into him, and we're going to direct you to his site, sign.org, at the end of the show again, and it's also in the show notes. But I'm going to be talking today specifically about not what he knows about Garabandal, because he knows way more than we can talk about in an hour, but we're going to talk about the most salient points that we need to know about the apparition in Garabandal, Spain. And he's written 2 books. We're going to talk about his newest book. In 2022, he wrote a book called Garabandal and Its Secrets, The Warning and the Miracle of Garabandal. Like nothing before in history, 2 supernatural events that will change the world, the global reset, heaven resets on their terms. But today, he's written in 2023, Garabandal, the Divine Reset, The Warning and the Great Miracle, 2 supernatural events that will change the world. And before I do that, I wanted to put a plug for a conference I'm having in October here in Virginia Beach. It is going to be amazing. On October 12th, we are going to do the Truth Speakers Conference. This is why something Ted Flynn should be at, because he's an amazing truth speaker. But we are having Christine Watkins, the whole Countdown to the Kingdom crew. Christine Watkins, Mark Mallet, Daniel O'Connor, and Father Chris Alar will be joining me here all day Saturday, October 12th. If you want to come, go to truthspeakers.org. There is a link right here in the show notes. I have to do that at the beginning because I always forget to do that in the end. Putting that aside, Ted Flynn, thank you for letting me talk for the first 95 minutes there.
Well,
God
thank you
bless
very
you.
much. I'll talk about Garabandal anytime, anywhere.
What got you started? I don't want any small talk. You are 4 decades. What got you started in this direction?
Well, when I was in school in Switzerland, I ended up quitting school at one point early, and I started literally hitchhiking around the world. And I left from Switzerland, found myself in Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Jordan, Egypt, Israel, etc. But I had already traveled quite a bit actually in Western Europe, and I found myself just by being in the cities like at Rue de Bac in Paris, like La Salette, and you can't go to Paris, without seeing Notre Dame or Saint Sulpice or something like that. So I had been actually in the Ukraine. I saw Hirushu, where just 500,000 people saw the Blessed Mother. And so, in the Ukraine. So I had actually seen in Egypt, I had actually seen St. Mark's Coptic Church in Zaytun. And this is where the Blessed Mother appeared during the 1967 war with Egypt and Israel, and she never spoke a word. And one of the people that was there at Zaytun, Egypt, was Anwar Sadat. And so I just learned about a lot of this. And because I've traveled a lot in my career, I have a much more global view of many of these apparitions than some. Many take a very parochial vision, whether it's Fatima or Lourdes or whatever, and they think theirs is the most important. I don't think any one is more important than the other. Fatima has had an enormous influence in the world. So my view is much more global. But in 1984, I met a man at church whose father-in-law was actually a very close friend of Joey Lomangino. And I had never heard of Garabandal up until then. And, the more I looked at it, the more I studied it, it fit into my global view because I've been actually a student of the rise and fall of civilizations for my whole adult life. And you could see the way the world was going through globalization because of the interconnectivity of the world economy. And frankly, with the emergence of the internet, that went into hyperdrive with literally trillions of dollars over US SWIFT codes, as well as the internet for foreign exchange on a daily basis. So this fit in, and I have come to the conclusion that Garabandal is actually the only way that humanity can be saved at this point due to the collective insanity that the world has gone with this heinous degree of sin that is a global thing right now. So, I just learned about it. And then in 1994, it was my first visit there. But in a book that my wife and I put together, we spoke, and it's called The Thunder of Justice. And we put the major apparition sites, Guadalupe, Lourdes, La Salette, Fatima, and the ones that were unapproved in the book were Medjugorje and Garabandal. And for me, the Blessed Mother has a sash of many, many different colors. So I saw it more global from 10,000 feet. And I don't take a parochial vision of one over the other as more important because she's speaking to the world for a specific reason. For
Yes.
instance, if it was World War One and you were in Pont, Maine and heard that message, Beno and Borang and everything else, you would know that these had enormous influence for that time in this part of the world. Because these apparitions, for me, are like Marian love letters. Heaven is sending us a love letter to basically steer the church back in the direction through her encouragement with her messages. So it wasn't so much a circuitous route for me, but a cumulative route of how I just saw how these things fit. And I've always been most excited about Garabandal as the apparition site because it's the one that makes an enormous amount of sense for where the world is at the moment.
Why? Before you answer that, tell our listeners, because many know, but give us a synopsis. The apparitions began and ended when? I know it was four girls, but just kind of the short and skinny.
Yeah, well, yeah, with time, we'll just kind of hit the highlights of the major points we want to discuss, literally the nectar of it all. In 1961, the Blessed Mother appeared on July 2, 1961, to four girls in a remote mountain village in northwestern Spain called Garabandal. And it's about 50 minutes. It's about an hour, give or take, from Santander, which is a beautiful city. It's a very metropolitan city, urban, not a super big city, but it actually has one of the biggest banks in all Spain called Banco Santander. And it's actually where Spanish royalty vacationed for many, many years because, frankly, the south of Spain, especially in the summer, is frankly, on the Costa del Sol, like a blast furnace. So, and the key word there is soul. And so a lot of the royalty and the gentry actually ended up journeying to the Cantabrian Mountains in the north, which was much cooler right on the Bay of Biscay. And when you're in downtown Santander, you can actually see the castle just off the bay. So what the Blessed Mother did is she appeared to four beautiful, young, pristine, pure souls. They hadn't been tainted by the world. It was a very simple village. And to put that in perspective, in 1961, when she first appeared, there literally was not a motor with a moving part in Garabandal. And they heated their homes basically through wood and there really wasn't the electrification. And in the 1960s, we were emerging, frankly, in a much bigger dimension after World War II as a bigger superpower. And to put it in perspective, in 1969, we sent men to the moon and brought them home safely.
Wow.
So that was only 8 years after that began. So you can see the tremendous dichotomy of the cultures at that time. But heaven had an agenda to use these four young girls, 11 and 12 years old, for this message to give the world. And it has to be noted that Garabandal is actually not a message specifically for Garabandal or Spain in general. It was a message for the world. And we might as well get into the main message of Garabandal, as all authentic apparition sites, is very, very simple. It's what all of the major ones are. She's asking for an amendment of life. That is, if you were looking at an organizational chart, you would put amendment of life right up top. And then, with arrows coming down into the departments, it was an enormous amount of messages where she spoke to the girls on a continual basis about the importance of the priesthood, family, and purity. So these are the main messages: amendment of life. And what is Garabandal? Garabandal is actually about one word. Garabandal is a message of hope. That's what it is. It's not to be feared, where a lot of people talk about this warning and other things. It's a grace to mankind. It's virtually God's DNA of trust, love, mercy, and all of that being in hope. Because if the world is really going off the rails, which it's going off at a very fast pace
Yeah.
right now, what greater grace than virtually a divine intervention?
But
You
you're
know,
right, though. People don't listen to the messages of hope. We are in a world that is soaked in wealth and just worldly pleasures. So it almost seems like, and I'm going to say this literally, these visions come to scare the hell out of people. It's like we're bound for hell. And so even though it's a message of hope, it seems like, okay, you aren't listening to the hopeful part. Let me also tell you the parts that you need to hear to keep you from going to hell. Would that be fair? Because that's
yeah, absolutely. I can't explain enough or say it even as strong as I can. Garabandal is a message of hope for the world. And one of my readers for the book, I released the book actually in 2024. And one of the readers is a very, very smart, wise woman, mid 70s, I would suspect. I know her very well. And she was one of my readers, to find typos and errors and
sure.
everything else. And when she read the book, she texted me one night, and I showed my wife, and it actually was the single best thing she could have ever told me, because this is how I crafted the book of what I feel heaven was trying to communicate to the world. She said, I have been so down on the direction of the church and the culture, but after reading the book, I feel great hope. It was the
Aw,
single best phrase she could have ever said anything to me,
that's
because
amazing.
that's what she got it. It's not a book of fear or messages. It's not one of fear, but we have to realize that heaven is communicating to us, yes, that our times are serious. We need to pay attention. And if anything, that I always mention, they're calling us back to the absolute fundamentals of the faith. What are the fundamentals? Prayer, scripture reading, confession, the rosary,
Sacraments.
letting the mass become the center of your life, the sacraments. And if we're doing those things, I always throw in community, because I think it's enormously important to be around like-minded people, to be lifted up. And if we're following those rubrics and fundamentals, we will actually do very, very well, because that will place us under her mantle. Because she has said in many places, the refuge is her immaculate heart. And that has to be understood when we're we're under the divine care of the Trinity and what heaven is asking of us. That is our safety, because there's so many contingencies in life that we are absolutely unable to cover all of them with any degree of safety. So we have to give it all over to God.
Amen. Well, let me just jump ahead and you will fill in blanks as we go. We'll talk about the miracle and the warning later, but the world speaks about a great reset. And, as a matter of fact, right here, I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia, across the water, Hampton, Virginia was a big billboard about 2, 3 years ago. And I know they were testing out the propaganda that literally did say, you will own nothing and be happy. And I thought, I didn't think that would hit here in America so quick. But anyway, the point being is, I am guessing that you said Garabandal, or what's going to take place is a divine reset. Is that true? And what does that mean?
Well, let's go back to the Great Reset. Are you saying literally you were driving and you saw a billboard that said you
Yep.
will own? Real, wow, that's
Yeah,
amazing. Of all
Hampton,
places in
Virginia.
the Wow, it's amazing why they chose that, because I've never seen one. But
Yeah.
that phrase is actually from Klaus Schwab, of the way that the globalists and these elites in very significant positions of power are trying to basically steer the world. So let's look at the term the Great Reset. That is a phrase that has been used many times before. The United States actually is the 23rd great empire in world history. Our run actually has been very short. It was probably since World War II. And at Bretton Woods, all the way from the beginning of World War II to the end of World War II, they met in the globalists and the bankers met in the Green Mountains at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. And they knew that the United States currency would become the reserve currency. So if you take a look at previous civilizations, the Sumerians, the Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Romans, Spain under the Armada, France under the Sun King of Louis XIV, Cannes says, 14, 15, 16s that built the Tuileries and Versailles and all of this. And then we had the French Revolution and rebellion of that kind of ostentatious wealth. And then the Bolshevik Revolution. These have all been where the world actually reset. Don't forget the Dutch guilder was prominent, and that's why the United States was heavily financed when John Quincy Adams actually went over to the Dutch for money. But it was basically Lafayette and the French under the tutelage and the guidance of Benjamin Franklin. And so this term reset is just a regurgitated word that's much more modern. But don't forget, before World War II, the reserve currency of the world was the sterling. And then the dollar has had its run. And right now we have many nations in the world: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South
The
Africa,
BRICS
which are called
nations.
which are called the BRICS, which was a term coined by a man named O'Neill with Goldman Sachs in 2002, where they were looking to emerge as a power. But those BRICS nations, you have many, many more nations in the world. Brazil, you have some Arab nations that they're trying to institute literally the gold dinar. So you have Norway's currency, the krona, which is actually backed by oil and gold. So this is just a transition where they're trying to take the global hegemony of the United States away from the dollar as a reserve currency. And frankly, we're a spent bullet. The United States empire is frankly over. And
Yeah.
this is the transition that's taking place. It's very hard for America to understand this, but if you read the Asia Times on a daily basis, you will see just how far China is in many, many areas ahead of us. And so, and they have a much tighter control through centralized government than we do, but we're kind of catching up fast. But this term, Great Reset, is just a term for our age now to the reserve currency. But the United States is already in a basket with the World Bank. And we were talking about Bretton Woods, the IMF, the IFC, and the World Bank were the key players at Bretton Woods. And that's when it was decided America would be the reserve currency. And we're in the process of losing it because our dollar is actually becoming
Useless.
valueless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you take a look at it right now, the United States is printing $1 trillion every 100 days. Now that's inflationary, that's Weimar type stuff on top of the QE trillions already, the COVID trillions. So, we're in essence a spent bullet. We will exist as a country the same way Spain has, uh, Italy has under Rome, Greece has, France has. We will exist as a country, but we're no longer an empire where the world looks to us. We've frankly lost our collective mind. So how does this pertain to Garabandal? This pertains to Garabandal for me because it's a global phenomena that is going to shock the world back to its senses. And if we really take a look, we can see that Garabandal, being so global, it will touch every single person in the world at the same time for the warning, to where they will see the state of their soul as God sees it at judgment. Now, you've been doing this for a while. I suspect you have met several people over the last number of years who have approached you who have experienced the warning. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, just this weekend I was with a couple of them at a conference with Christine Watkins.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's exactly what happens. We've probably met over our lifetime since releasing the Thunder of Justice in 1993, because the warning and the miracle of Garabandal kind of became the heart and soul of the book, which I never knew it would be that way. But when we get into Fatima and the other Guadalupe and other sites, but it really did excite the passions in people to see it. And so the stories are frankly pretty close to identical. I always liken it to a person that you've been around very close to you that is dying. The individual and the family have somewhat different stories, but in the
Right.
end, they're all very, very similar with the major components with what's happening actually in the process of death. And the stories actually of Garabandal are very, very similar in that all of the people speak that it's the single greatest event in their life that they could have ever imagined or dreamt. Number two, they don't have any idea, actually, sometimes for several years, how to actually articulate that. And so, three, it's taken sometimes years for these people to put it on paper. And also, they're actually many times very quiet about it because they have actually thought they've lost their mind.
Now, when you're referring to these people, are you referring to the four girls at Garabandal, or are you talking about all apparitions when
Oh,
our mother
no, no,
appears?
no. The people who have experienced it,
The
I'm talking
warning.
about the general event of what the warning is from
Okay.
people that I've spoken to where every single person that I know has had an enormous amendment of
Massive
life.
conversion of life. That way. Okay,
Big,
I wasn't exactly
bigger
sure.
than massive. And that's why I say it's an act of grace and hope and love. It's God loving humanity back to its senses.
Yes. Yes.
And basically, Father Gobi even said in one of his messages in the Marian Movement of Priests, the Blue Book, he said, "This is not to be comprehended with the human mind, what's coming. These events are so catastrophically huge that we know basically in our own mind what they'll be with the warning and the miracle. But I liken these events because the Blessed Mother said, um, they won't even be able to be explained by science. Now, if we know the 10 plagues of Egypt, they weren't explained by science. The parting of the Red Sea could have never been
Been
explained by
explained.
science. Had you said to these Hebrew people as they were walking, from downtown Cairo by the pyramids, to this Red Sea, and Moses would have said, listen, this thing is going to part, but he himself didn't even know. And if you actually look at the writings of Maimonides, the great Jewish scholar, Moses, according to Cecil B. DeMille, was not actually on a rock or some sort of cleft where he raised his staff. Moses was actually up to his nose before it parted.
Wow.
So the Lord is asking for our trust in the miracle actually at Fatima with the 70,000, according to the New York
Yeah.
Times, that witnessed the miracle. These things are not to be understood. And basically, I actually go back, and it's one of the reasons I like it, because it is the miraculous. Because when I open the Bible, I see the miraculous. That's who God is for
Yeah.
me. And that's why St. Augustine said, if you can understand it, it's not of God. And there's the phrase for that. And it's kind of the same phrase that Yahweh used with Moses, ego sum qui sum, I am who I am. So we're not going to understand these events in our own mind. We
Right.
think we may, and Moses was trying to put God in some sort of category
Box.
that he was beyond space, time, and understanding. He's a being that we can't fully understand, and that's why the basis of Aquinas, with his 50 volumes as well as Summa, his magnum opus, was he really relied a lot on that statement of Augustine. If you understand it, it is not God.
Well, let me
So,
get you to help me understand something. Again, I recognize that a lot of my viewers have never heard of some of these things for the first time. So just the short and skinny on Garabandal is our mother appeared to four girls beginning in 1961. When did the messages end? And this is the one where she gave each of the girls different messages to hold on to about the warning, and I'll let you
well,
know what that is. I know she's going to tell people 8 days before the miracle is going to happen that it's going to happen. Can you just give us the kind of like the Cliff Notes version of that for those who are like, what happened to Garabandal?
well, there were 2,000 appearances by the Blessed Mother. And I always like to say, if you really take a look at that number of appearances, there is not a great body of messages that were given to the public. It's not like at that time in 1961, where they went through 1965, which was a period actually of 52 months. So 4 years and 4 months, the Blessed Mother appeared. And there wasn't a lot written down. It came out in diaries. Um, it
Of the
came
four
out in
girls.
Yeah, it came out in diaries. Some of the messages were given, but they were, the Blessed Mother sometimes would appear to one, a couple of them, or collectively four. And I put even in the book, I mean, the book is 324 pages, and some of it appears to be redundant, and to a certain extent it is on the same subject, but the way the girls reiterated what was said is sometimes nuanced and a little bit different, but meaning the same thing. And so, there were times, many, many times, where the Blessed Mother spoke to the girls for 2.5 hours. There were several times all night long. And the girls spoke very affectionately of her. It was like a mother. They spoke as a friend. She asked what they did that day. So it was a friendship. And if you really take a look, from a strictly logical standpoint, the Blessed Mother was actually discipling the young girls for the future as young women. I mean, think of 11 and 12, of how young that is.
Is that how old the four girls were? We had Conchita,
Yeah,
Mari Loli, Mari Jacinta. I
Jacinta and
Jacinta,
Mary Cruz.
Mary
And
Cruz, Mari
yeah,
Cruz.
and 3 out of the 4 married American men. Mary Cruz stayed in Spain, and Mary Lowley died in 2009. But she died of complications from lupus. But there isn't just like, they went all of a sudden after a message to a table and they gave the message. A lot of them came out over time. They came out very anecdotally. They came out through conversations with people. So there wasn't like this formal regimen
Right.
um, where a message was given and then released and then, was translated into different languages for the world because it was 1961. So, we don't know a lot, and there's actually a lot of speculation. My methodology in this book was specifically to stay with the messages from 1961 to 1965 only. I didn't speculate. I didn't give my opinions. I just presented data. And so what that does is, and I've been thanked by some people over the last few years, and especially the last few months, of just staying what the girls said rather than my speculation. Because if I had anybody reading the messages know that there's great similarities to La Salette, Akita, and Fatima, as well as others. I didn't get into that because, frankly, the book would have been 800 pages, but
Yeah.
I wanted it to be about Garabandal, of what the girls were told. Now, with some of the other stories, with, is the warning in the miracle in an even numbered year? Are they in the same calendar year? Is it in the months of April? Is the miracle in the month of April or May or whatever? I just said what the girls said. And so these stories, have come out through other visionaries, locutions, and sometimes apparitions, of what people have said. I didn't get into it.
What did the girls say? So, did the girls get a message that there specifically would be the warning? Did they specifically get a message that there would be a miracle? What are the specifics that they did receive, and why are we receiving these
Well,
two?
the fat in the fire, frankly, of the messages of Garabandal, of what it's probably most known for, is the warning and the miracle. So let's break down the warning. The warning is where every person in the world at the same time will see the state of their soul as God judged it, as I just mentioned a few
Yeah.
minutes ago. That's a very, very significant event. I'm calling that the divine reset. Father Gobi is actually saying it's the second Pentecost. The word has interchangeable words. Aviso, the warning is aviso in Spanish. It can also mean notice. We have the words judgment in miniature, illumination of conscience, or actually life review. Many people liken it to a near-death experience. I don't. From people that I've spoken to that have had NDEs, it's nowhere near as
Yeah.
comprehensive or frankly, significant in their life. And those that have actually lived a virtuous life, confession, rubrics of the faith, and lived a good life, it's not going to be as difficult for them as it is for people who have actually,
Sex
um,
traffickers, human
yeah, that's right.
smugglers, drug
It,
dealers.
and frankly, if the Holy Spirit came and sat at the end of their bed, they wouldn't even care or acknowledge it. And because it's, just what you say, drug traffickers or sex traffickers or whatever, that's very, very hardcore sin. So it's going to be much more devastating for them at the time of the warning as it would be for somebody who has been staying with the rubrics of the faith over their life, or had a profound conversion with confession and contrition and acknowledge their sin.
And when
And
they do
what it is,
receive this, they're also going to see if I were to die today, if I was going to go to heaven, hell, or purgatory. And that's when a large number of people are actually going to die because they won't be able to handle what they see. Correct? Or
um,
this is
I,
what I
I'm,
know from the warning, but that may not specifically be Garabandal, right? Is that what you're saying?
um, yeah, I mean, the warning is not specifically a day of death. I mean, I could tell you that there was a person that I know. He was a former policeman in New York City. This is one story that I even put in a film, and I put Father Shire actually in a film in 1995, whose story is all over the net and people talk about it, where his brains were frankly, on a street after a bad car accident. And he was medevaced, and he heard the Blessed Mother, Jesus, say he has not been a good priest. And the Blessed Mother begged to give him another chance, and he lived. But there's another man who had been a cop in New York City, and right around the time of the Drug Enforcement Administration, this is a public testimony with this man, and it's all over the world. He became a missionary in South Africa for over 25 years after he experienced the warning. And he had been involved with the alcohol culture of Miami, the boat culture, all of the drinking, womanizing, hadn't been a good father. And when he actually saw the warning where he was shown his life, he himself told me in my own home that he couldn't get off his kitchen room floor for 5 hours.
Wow.
But look at what happened. It was a tremendous day of grace for him that he was eternally grateful on that event. So for some, it's going to be difficult. Is it a day of death? The answer to that is possibly, but overall, it's a day of grace to where that's why, as I say, I call in the title of the book, this is the divine reset of God, because I believe the collective insanity in the world is so great, nothing else can work any longer than divine intervention. We're just simply too far down this road of sin with all the things going on. Because frankly, if you look at our life, especially in the West, and I think I can pretty much speak for most spots in the world, we, especially in the United States, due to abortion being legal all the way back to 1973 with Roe v. Wade, the internet culture with pornography, the stuff we've been seeing on TV, by the time a kid gets to literally 18 years old, according to study, he's seen 20,000 deaths and shootings by just watching regular TV. And what
Wow.
that actually rewires your neural pathways, like frankly, a drug addiction or a sex addiction. So this is why you ask why it's kind of my pet apparition. Everything fits together with Garabandal. But we know that every person in the world will experience it at the exact same time. And the person who spoke about that was actually Mary Lowley, where she died, as I said, in 2009. And she knew the year of the warning. The person who knows the day of the miracle is Conchita, who lives in New York City.
Yeah. So the other two don't know. They weren't given messages on the warning or the
Oh
miracle.
yeah, they were. What the kids collectively knew, they basically speak a lot about, a lot of the same things. They're very familiar with it, but there tends to be one who is more known, and Mary Lowley, because she knew the year of the warning, was much more vocal in that. But the
Yeah.
person who turned out of the four to kind of be the spokesperson for the four
Miss
turned out
Conchita.
to be Conchita
Yeah, and she's
and
about
living in
76 years old now, living in New York, I think.
She's exactly 75, which people
75.
always ask me that. And frankly, here we are in a podcast. I never like to mention a woman's name, but what
Yeah,
it does is it puts it in context,
exactly.
because frankly, if she lives forever, she'd be the first person to live forever. So, she's getting up there in years like everybody else. And so, is this soon? I personally decided to write the book when I saw two specific prophecies that were now in view. And the first one is that when the Pope goes to Moscow, after he returns from Moscow, Europe would break out, and Russia would overrun a great part of Europe, or the free world. And so we know that the Pope has had actually a tremendous interest for those following this, to all the way back in February 2016. He actually met Patriarch Kirill in the Havana, Cuba airport, where they met for several hours and actually got along famously. And then we've got basically the Eastern Rite with the Roman Rite, where the church split in 1054. And so there's actually a prophecy at the time of the miracle, there would, quote, be the reunification of the church. So that has to, the United States, or I'm sorry, Christianity was never aligned with Islam or Judaism. It wasn't aligned as a faith the way the Eastern Rite with the Roman Rite or the Protestant Reformation, which is now 507 years ago. And we're coming up on 1,000 years of Kiev Rus in 1054, frankly, with the Eastern Rite. So,
So, yeah.
so that's a big one. And we know anybody following the Pope actually went after right after the beginning of the war, he actually went to the Russian embassy trying to broker a peace. He's had delegations going back and forth to Kiev as well as Moscow trying to get a meeting. We know also the Pope was trying to get a meeting on the way to not Uzbekistan, I'm drawing a blank, Mongolia. Now, Mongolia is a country with less than 1,500 Catholics. He was using Mongolia actually, where he asked Moscow if he could refuel. It was used as a pretense. But on the other hand, he didn't really need to because the trip was round trip from Rome to Mongolia. And he didn't refuel in Moscow, but it was very, very evident he was trying to get a meeting with either Patriarch Kirill, but the invitation doesn't count if it's from the religious leader. It has to come from the president of the country, and that's the way the curia works. And let's face it, Kirill is actually nomenclatura in an apparatchik. He's a mechanism of the machinery of the Soviet Union because if he crosses Putin, he's gone. And that's why Kirill has been a strong advocate for Russia's position. He can't cross Putin. So that was one thing. In the other event, because that's a prophecy of Garabandal, the other is that the events would happen after a synod. Now, we all know there's been this synod on synodality that we've been seeing
And
some
the
of these
Amazon
documents.
Synod and the Synod on the Family. So they've been starting to use that word a lot more
Yeah,
than.
originally when Francis started it, it was a 2-year synod. And then there's never been a synod like this in church history to where every single diocese orders every single parish to have meetings that are listening sessions that we had and you had them as well. And then they write up a report of what they heard. And then last October 2024, I'm sorry, 2023, where they all met in Paul VI Hall at tables of 10, and they dialogued on everything with what should be the direction of the church. So we've never seen this before, but what Pope Francis did about 2 months ago, without giving a reason, he actually pushed the end of the synod now out till June 2025. So, it wasn't mentioned, will there be a report after October 2024? Maybe, maybe not. But but Francis did push it out because the last phase is called the universal phase. Last year, 2023, was the continental, where they met as continents, and then the or countries really, and then the year before that was the local, where they all met and submitted
Right.
reports. So it's very clear these events are more in focus. And I've always said we haven't seen the fulfillment of these prophecies yet, which is why I've never thought that they're here now. Don't forget, several years ago, people were saying because it's in an even numbered year, and a lot of people have said it's in April, that the sole source of that is Maria Sirocco, where she alleges Mary Lowley told that to her. But that isn't what the message of Garabandal said. So, is it true? The
We don't
answer is
know.
maybe.
Hmm.
Did Mary Lowley leak it to Maria Sirocco, who was a friend who, ended up moving to Pasadena, California for years and years? The answer is maybe. I'm not prepared to say yes or no,
Correct.
but I do know that the messages of Garabandal never said in an even numbered year or specifically the month. So the girls never said that
Got
then.
it.
So trying to stick to the script
Stick to
of
this
my,
primary source.
that's right. Because it's funny you say the primary source, because I've given the example many times on this. If we're at a table of 10 people and especially if there's a couple of bottles of wine and we've all had a glass or two. If I tell you're on my left and we go clockwise, and if I tell you a story about a fish I caught that was 6 inches big,
Yeah, it's going to be
and I,
6 feet by the time you make it around the
yeah,
circle.
but by the time that gets back to me as the 11th person, because I started it as the 10th, that little fish has just become a blue whale,
Right.
you
Well, it
know,
might even become a fishing ship.
and it
Changes
took
its whole
three it,
consistency. That's
and
right.
it took three people and a harpoon to bring it in.
Yeah.
So that, but
So you're right,
in
and that's why I appreciate that you're keeping these messages down to the actual, primary sources and be specific because I've talked to several people about Garabandal before, and I had heard the thing about the even year and the April, May. So it is good that you let us know that that wasn't heard from Mariloli specifically, except through a friend, and so it makes it a secondary source. So we do have to be very careful about what, and here's a point too, should we care so much about the date if we don't amend our lives? I mean, that's what you started the show with, this message of hope. Let's amend our lives.
Well, you've just hit, in my opinion, of the way I look at these because I've been around so many of them in my lifetime and written on them. It always boils down to an amendment of life. And I was actually asked a couple of weeks ago, if I knew from a pretty well-known person who does this kind of stuff, did I know one visionary in particular? And, I'm asked that a lot. What do I think of this one? And I don't really give an opinion for most all of the time because I no longer read them. I already know what's true. I know the real dollar bill. And once you know the real dollar bill, you can always spot a counterfeit. And if it doesn't fit into certain criteria, it's bogus,
Yeah.
and you can spot that. And so, I have actually just followed my own advice over the last several of years because of the stress, the anxiety, the despondency, and we both know many people who are actually in different stages of depression. And now, if anybody goes to a psychiatrist, now you're a PhD in which is heavily psychological in what you do. Every single psychiatrist or psychologist that I've read about or even spoken to in my lifetime, when a person is experiencing stress and anxiety in their life, the first thing that person tells them, if they're frankly a good counselor, which they almost all do because it's so easy and practical, shut the news off.
The truth, that is the truth. I have turned off the news. I have not watched TV. I will watch my Milwaukee Brewers come on. And I have Little House on the Prairie reruns that I watch. Haven't watched the news on TV since January of 2021. It just became too vitriolic. And do you know what? I have great peace in my life. And I just continue to do what God calls me to do. And I see my grandchildren. I didn't even realize that O.J. Simpson was dead until 10 days after his death because they're like, oh, you know. But yeah, it's a good rule. Let me get specific on a couple other things that I know that the June 18th of 1965 message was one that we worry about. Many cardinals, many bishops, many priests are on the road to perdition and are taking many souls with them. Less and less importance is being given to the Eucharist. Who was given that message?
You're talking about, well, there were two of what I call the bookends. You're talking
Okay.
about the cup is flowing over.
Yeah, as my message of
Is
October 18th of 61 has not been complied with and has been made known to the world, I am advising you that this is the last one. Before the cup was filling, now it is flowing over. Um,
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. But I just wanted to revisit something that you said that I think is absolutely eminently important for all of the
did I say
people.
something brilliant? I
It
need to
was
tell that to my
absolutely brilliant.
husband. You
It, it
tell my
actually,
husband I
it
did that.
actually, it's actually my sweet spot today of the way that
Excellent.
I'm communicating with people. You said you in essence shut the news off right about the time of COVID.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for us, for the survival right now with the speed of communications and everything that's going on, Unless that is actually done, I'm very overt saying a lot of people are no longer going to make it.
Yeah.
They're going to have a very, very tough time. And so that's a very, very important part of basically
Survival.
survival now.
Yeah.
I can tell you, with we're in our apostolate, which we've had our magazine now for 35 years, and we're actually in many respects uh, at almost on the same level as a confessional, with people coming in and talking to us that are really in desperate need of help. And a great number of the people in our area that have had abortions, they didn't really know where to go. So they came to us because we had a lot of the resources for that. And then many of them have actually become very, very vocal, trying to help other women, and with even Silent No More, to where they speak all over on it. And so it's very, very important to begin to focus in on the absolute rubrics of the necessity, to where you said you felt great peace.
I do.
So let's go to the June 18th, 1965. As my message of October 18th, meaning the of
You're speaking
1961,
as the Blessed Virgin. This is the Blessed
right,
Virgin, so this.
has not been complied with and has been made known to the world, I am advising you that this is the last one. Again, June 18th, 1965. Before the cup was filling, now it is flowing over. Many cardinals, many bishops, and many priests are on the road to perdition and are taking many souls with them. Less and less importance is being given to the Eucharist. Again, just how we started out this show. The message was on the priesthood and the Eucharist. And this is the last message, and it's of how important, because less and less importance is being given to the Eucharist. That is our lifeblood. And we've been asked to go to daily mass if possible, and many don't. And I can tell you, during COVID, when I actually went to mass, or went to adoration when the church was shut down, but they opened it 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the evening for adoration. It was frankly just the same few people there, no matter whether I went in the morning or the evening. But this is what's being asked. So again, to finish that up, you should turn the wrath of God away from yourselves by your efforts. If you ask his forgiveness with sincere hearts, he will pardon you. I, your mother, through the intercession of Saint Michael the Archangel, ask you to amend your lives. Here you go again. The
Yeah.
last message, the word amend, very, very critical. We can't lose sight of that in light of a lot of this hysteria that is now around Marian apparitions,
Right.
locutions, and visionaries and
Yeah, forget
everything
the
else.
dates, people. Amend your lives. Have you started going to confession? Have you stopped your addictions? Have you stopped, all these things? Stop focusing on the dates and the times and the miraculous parts of it, and focus on the part that you actually have power over that will save your soul.
That's correct. And that's why we revisited what you said. You've never seen so much peace in your life until you shut off the news. And,
Yes.
there's a certain level to be literate and frankly functional in a society, and, we're not living the lives of monks. We're called to be able to converse with people. But if you take a look, and I just did a podcast the other day where I actually looked this data up. And listen to this of how we're consumed with technology. The average person in America is online 7 hours a day.
Ugh.
Now, we're online right now, so a great deal of that is actually work. I get that. Now, the average person is on their iPhone 4 hours a day.
So now we're up
And the
to
average
11.
4 hours, and anybody that's got an iPhone, at least on mine, it kicks back, your usage was up 12% last week.
Right.
And it's, and 2 weeks later, or a week later, your usage is down 15% from the week before. And frankly, a lot of nights when I'm even watching movies or something, I'm looking at my phone, researching something. So I'm on it a lot. So mea culpa, mea culpa. But um, then the average person over the age of 15 watches 3 hours of television a day, and the average person over the age of 65 watches four hours of TV a day. So cumulatively, come to that number in your own life and look at the data usage
That's like
of how.
14, 15,
So you
16
wonder why,
hours.
frankly, people don't have clear thoughts, because we're actually, on an individual basis in America, frankly, like the frog in the water that has boiled to death and doesn't even know it, to the degree that we are accepting heinous sin in our midst, and we refuse to speak up for the last several generations. And I make no bones about this. We are here as a culture because the Christian community remained silent. We were called to speak up. And if you even want to go back to 1962 and 63, by order of the Supreme Court of the United States, we took prayer and the Bible out of the classroom all the way back in the 60s, right when these apparitions were taking place. The cup is filling up, you know. And frankly, I think then in 1962 and 63, from a biblical standpoint, we actually sealed our own fate.
Yes, we did.
And then you could take a look with the pill coming around in the late, really 67, 68, that was continually modified for the right
Oh,
dosage for women.
divorces. It was
Divorces.
like 350. I just heard the stats, but I don't have the exact numbers memorized. But before prayer was taken out of school in 1962, so 1961, the America had approximately 358 divorces in the entire country. And then after, it was shot up to 70,000
Wait a minute, is that
after.
possible? Before 1962, 358 a year?
That's what I heard. And so I'm going to double check because it was either divorces or annulments, but I believe it was divorces. So no one
It,
hold
so,
me to
it,
that, but
sound, it
it shot up
sounds
in one
low.
year.
Right. It sounds low for divorces, but then again, in 1962, I wasn't tracking with this kind of stuff, and probably
Yeah.
neither were you. But I do
I was
know
born in
that,
64, so
yeah. But I do know that the annulment process was almost non-existent,
yeah.
um, before and during Vatican II, and annulments did explode. But neither makes a difference. I think your point is taken, that this sort of stuff exploded. And
Yes.
so here's what, to finish this message: you are now receiving the last warning. I love you very much and do not want your condemnation. Pray to us with sincerity, and we will grant your request. You should make more sacrifices. Think about the passion of Jesus. So this is a very, very significant message. And one of the reasons the church, and it's very important to probably bring this up now before we forget, Garabandal has never been condemned. Since 1961, um, um, when the apparitions began, there has been 7 bishops since 61, and no bishop has ever condemned it. It's very clear from the statements they've made. Some have not really been in favor of it, but on the other hand, none have ever condemned it. So this isn't, without getting into the Latin of
Right.
non-constat to supernaturality and constat non-supernaturality, we'll just go with the English version. You're either approved, category 1, up until, frankly, last Friday. There were 3 categories
Right.
for apparitions. First was you approved, like Guadalupe, Lourdes, Fatima,
Fatima.
the majors, we know those. Then let's put it in the middle phase, like Medjugorje, Garabandal, and others, where the church has decided
Not
to leave
really.
it alone because there wasn't enough evidence to either condemn it or approve it. And frankly, if I were Pope, or I had the final say with the stroke of a pen on a signature to approve Garabandal, I would not approve Garabandal until these events absolutely play out. So I do think that the church in these instances is very prudent in how they view this.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, I don't think the church does a good job actually investigating these. In Garabandal, with the commission, was very, very inadequate in the way they investigated Garabandal with the actual commission. So, in one hand, they've made a good decision. And because let's face it, if the church approves it and then something comes out scandalous, it's awful for the priests
Yeah.
and the clergy to have to defend that. So when the church rules, they usually get it right.
Yeah.
And so the third phase is actually flat out condemnation,
Yeah.
which is actually, Bayside, and there's some others, but they're kind of rare to see a flat out condemnation.
Yeah. Well, we're just going to continue to tell our viewers the church says you're not required to believe any private revelation, but be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. Keep it all in, take it in, and ask the Lord to guide you and give you wisdom. But this one's just had too many, it lines too much with the other apparitions to not be taken seriously. Um, I'd like to jump ahead to some other significant messages of Garabandal is the Night of Screams. Can you tell us about that?
I can. I can even read them from my notes, as I always like to get it right. First of all, the first night of screams, people have to realize that these are two significant messages. There's two elements of these. One is the supernatural events, that the events spoken about are actually supernatural. There are events coming to the world through war and other things that are actually caused through man's sin. But the nights of screams are actually with a chastisement, if it's to come because it's conditional, are actually supernatural. So we'll read them. Both nights at 10:30 p.m., the girls were shown in a vision that rivers would turn red with blood, i.e., there's your supernatural. The church would be persecuted and decimated. Its buildings will no longer exist as they once did. Professing your faith would be very difficult, and the sacraments would be difficult to receive. The girls were heard crying out, "Stop telling us those things. Wait, wait. Everyone should confess. They should get ready. When it appears all is lost, the warning would come. Their tear-stained faces and incoherent speech immediately afterwards attested to the trauma experienced by Jacinta, Mary Lowley, and Mary Cruz during the first night of screams. For some time, details of what they experienced were not divulged. Over time, details did emerge. This gets back to what I said earlier. The nights of screams,
Right.
after it happened, there wasn't like this big message written up. The details emerged over time
Right.
through conversation or diary or the way the girls express their views.
But
So it's
people were
very
obviously watching them while this was happening, and that's why people heard them shouting these things
Yeah, but again, the message did take some time to come out.
to disseminate.
Shortly afterwards, Jacinta and Mary Lowley confirmed the coming chastisement. The Virgin told us that we do not expect the chastisement, that without expecting it, it will come, since the world has not changed. And she has already told us twice, and we do not pay attention to her, since the world is getting worse, and it should change very much, and it has not changed at all. Prepare yourself, confess before the chastisement will come. And if the world continues the same. So there's the conditional if.
Yeah.
The chastisement is a conditional thing unless there is a conversion of heart of people. Now, the second night of screams, would you want to get into that as well?
I
Because
do.
I think we're getting a little tight on time, but you
Well, this
call
is
that.
intriguing. I'm going to let you keep going.
The second night of screams was on June 20th, 1962, on the
This is what, a
vigil,
couple days later, is that?
the next night.
Oh, the next night. Okay.
First one was June 19th. This was June 20th, 62. On the vigil of Corpus Christi, there was another horrifying vision that lasted for 3.5 hours. The girls saw destructive things happening in the world at a future time. Mary Lowley Mazan said, "We saw rivers change into blood. Fire fell from the sky, and something worse still, which I am not able to reveal now. Three of the girls were shown the great chastisement of fire that would come if humanity reverts to its evil ways after the grace of the great miracle. The girls were heard saying, "Oh, don't let this happen. Don't let this come. May everyone go to confession first." The girls wept, "Don't let this happen. Don't let this come. Forgive us. Don't let this happen." So, without question, this was a very traumatic event, not only for the girls,
Yeah.
but listen how emotive this speech is. Fire from heaven. Now, I didn't get into this in the book. That's the message of Akita, Japan, which is actually an approved apparition by Bishop John Ito in 1973. So,
So these
but
messages happened first, then Our Lady appeared again in 7 years later. No, 10,
10,
10-ish,
well,
a
if you look
decade
at
later.
1962, it's about 11
11
at,
years later.
at Akita. But the
And
point
that was
is,
approved. And it was coming back to what was said here.
and we saw rivers change into blood. That's also the message of Rwanda. That's actually an approved apparition.
And
That
actually
rivers,
took place.
I'll never forget, I was actually speaking in Texas. I was on a 9-city tour of Texas. And I was going into the Shell building in downtown New Orleans. And there was a newsstand right at the bottom. Now, I knew the message of Rwanda because it was in my talk where the Blessed Mother came. And as I say, it's now an approved apparition. And I remember looking at the newsstand and I bought a copy of Newsweek and I bought a copy of Time for my talk that was a half hour later in the Shell building. And it literally showed Rwanda on the cover, which it said a river of blood on the cover. And then the other cover, I forget whether it was Time or Newsweek, which one said which. The other one said, "There are no more devils in hell. They are all in Rwanda." And we know what happened there, where 800,000 people were murdered in that, the Rwandan genocide that most people
Yeah.
learned about in America actually through the movie Hotel Rwanda. And a lot of people wouldn't have known about that. But the point is that these things have to be taken seriously when they're said literally by the Queen of Heaven and Earth, the mother of the Son, the daughter of the Father, and the spouse of the Holy Spirit. We need to spend time dwelling on the seriousness of where we're being called to this amendment of life, or these things are going to happen. But again, these chastisements are supernatural. You don't
I,
have fire, falling from heaven
right.
or
That's not a normal, scientific thing, unless, of course, we're talking about asteroids or things. But
But can you imagine? Here I am literally speaking in Rwanda in my talk because I knew prophetically that it
and
had
there
all
it
come
is.
true. And I pull literally a Time in a Newsweek. There are no more devils in
Did
hell.
you
They
get
are all in
chills?
Rwanda. It was unbelievable. You want to talk about a marketing prop in a talk to validate and authenticate what you're talking about. It just doesn't get better than that as
No.
an authentic thing. So these should be taken very, very seriously.
I was just thinking about some more questions I was going to ask, and I do realize we're, past an hour. And if I thought I could get to the end of this,
Well, I
maybe I
knew
could.
we wouldn't. I knew we wouldn't.
I
Okay.
know, but well, there's. Let's see. I'm just love Ted gave me so many great notes, and it's okay. We're gonna ask a couple things. Um, let's go ahead and jump ahead to what our mother said to them about abortion, because I have heard people talk. These girls had no idea about what do you mean? They couldn't even comprehend. But what our mother was referring to was abortion. Can you tell us what you know about that?
Let's put that in the context. The context is specifically 1960s Spain, remote, simple village
Where they had no
with
electricity and no
where they
motors.
had, yeah. And so back to where here we are in Roe v. Wade in 1973, maybe 10 years later, or give or take, doesn't matter. But, Conchita asked, how could a child die in its mother's womb? To that effect. I don't, do you have the quote right there in front of you?
Yes, it said on the day after Our Lady's last appearance at Garabandal, Conchita asked how someone can kill a child without killing the mother. She was asked, "Now, what gave you that idea?" Abortion is a big part of that answer, but there are other things in the church and world contributing to it. The word abortion was never used by Conchita. Um, and so Conchita said, I'll just read to you your fantastic notes. Conchita said, "Well, the Blessed Mother spoke about this and she let me know that this will happen with the overflowing of the chalice. In the second message of June 18th of 1965, the Virgin said, before the cup was filling up, now it is flowing over." Conchita said this trembling, without being able to visualize what it really implied. She said it disturbed her very much, but that she felt ridiculous because she had not understood at all how this could happen. The Blessed Virgin had not explained it to her, and up until that moment, nobody else had been able to explain it to her at all.
Yeah, I knew generally I could have paraphrased that because, I knew the message, but I wanted it specifically the way she said it. And that then again, here you go. You want to talk about a visionary with the way the future will
Right.
be. There isn't anything in world history. Now, I've been a part of a prayer group where I have an OBGYN in it. And what I've learned, I've been in a Gobi Cenacle now for literally 29 years and meeting every single Thursday night, give or take until, a lot of breaks. But
And Father
um,
Gobi, just to break a little side note, Father Gobi, who he's referring to, was just made a servant of God, I believe, on May 1st, which is on his
he's,
way to
yes, going through the
process of
beginning to go
statehood.
through the beatification process, yes.
Yeah. So you're
But the
talking about
point
him as we're
is
referring
that,
to this.
yeah, but so here's Conchita, literally, I just wanted her words there exactly. Because if you really take a look, she's actually speaking specifically about the way the sin of abortion would literally ravage the world. And and there are people listening that know people that have maybe had an abortion. And in the very mid 80s, my wife and I ran a pro-life counseling center where we actually in the 80s we advertised in something called the Yellow Pages, and we actually advertised in the abortion section, and people thought they were coming in for an abortion. So we fought fire with fire, and we counsel thousands of girls. And our best counselors were the women who actually had abortions because they could speak to them about the psychological, the physical, and the emotional and the spiritual
Trauma.
aspects of
That's
what they're
right.
doing. And, a lot of these people take decades, frankly, to heal. And those that actually are into divine mercy and understand God's love, they tend to heal much, much quicker when they actually explore St.
Yeah.
Faustina's diary and the concept of divine mercy. They tend to heal emotionally much quicker than others. So, but the point is that Conchita spoke about this without using the word abortion.
Yeah. And she was
And that's
stunned.
it's a
Yeah.
very prescient concept even of itself.
Yeah. There
So
are so many things. Okay, go
heaven's
ahead.
ahead of us. Heaven's ahead of us. That's the
Yeah.
point.
And they want to rescue us. They're trying to give us all these messages. I have many, many more questions, but I was actually thinking, would you mind just doing a part two? I think my viewers would love to have you back. Do you think that's something you and I could agree to just continue talking about some of this?
Sure, considering we probably scratched the surface of 1% of it.
Barely, barely.
And we could
Yeah,
maybe get into the miracle next time, because the miracle, the warning and the miracle are frankly the sizzle of the fat and the fire here.
yeah.
Because, some of the messages, and there's two other messages, what I call the bookends early on, and we have the Night of Screams as well. But the miracle, there's an amazing amount of data actually on the miracle, which is really amazing to think that so much has been given to us on the miracle itself. I
I
mean, if
let's
you on the
go ahead.
miracle data
Yeah.
points,
Yeah, let's do that. Let's start with that. And because that's very intriguing as well. So many people talk about both. I hear a lot more about the warning. Um, but I hear about the miracle as well, and I'd like to hear what you specifically know. Keep us clean, right? Just keep us clean. You're very good at staying factual and not bringing in other sources, but sticking with the topic.
Well, I quote Joe Friday. Are you old enough to remember
I
Dragnet?
am. Just the facts,
Well,
ma'am.
I'm probably the only Marian writer to ever quote Joe Friday, where Joe Friday, it's in the book. I quote Joe Friday, where he says, he shows up at a crime scene and he says to the lady, just the facts, ma'am, just the
Just the
facts.
facts. That's a good place to kind of tie us up for the moment.
Yeah,
Till
and
we do part two.
I also quote Mike Tyson, the boxer Mike
Well,
Tyson.
now there's a theological
There you go. There's a
string.
theological genius where I said, where Mike Tyson says, listen, it's all theory till you get hit in the face and knocked down.
Yeah, you've just nibbled on the ear of the person who's listening. You get that?
Oh, yeah.
You
It's all
remember?
theory. I got it.
No, Mike Tyson. Anybody watching
Ev-
know what he did? You just
Evander
nibbled on
Holly,
the ear. Yeah, he bit the
Evander,
ear off of somebody in a fight.
Evander Holyfield.
Is that whose ear he bit?
Just a piece of it. He didn't
Just
bite the whole
nibbled.
thing off.
Well,
Yeah,
we're just
nibble.
we're just itching your ears and nibbling on your ears to give you some great information. My whole point, and I'm going to turn back to Ted in a minute, but the whole point of doing this, I do this podcast, I get these amazing guests, but I just want to win souls. And I know Ted is the same. We talked before we went on the air. We want you in heaven. We want your kids in heaven. We want your siblings in heaven. And if our mother is finding this stuff is so imperative that she's warning us, we're going to do our part too. Do yours. Don't be afraid of what people think. Spread this message far and wide. You have a newsletter or website, Signs and Wonders for Our Times, and people can find that at sign.org. That's what inspirational stories about heaven's agenda. Is that what you kind of called it?
Well, that's a part of it. Inspirational stories we've written on probably nearly every major apparition site in the world over the last 35 years, interviewed the people, the visionary, been with them, traveled with them, done pilgrimages. We've done 14 pilgrimages all over the world since 94. Garabandal, Spain and Portugal was actually our first. 1994, because The Thunder of Justice was released in 1993. But no, we've written a lot. Our last few magazines, the feature article I do in every single magazine, the last three have been on Garabandal because it's for our time and it's getting closer, as I
Yes, it
say,
is.
soon, but not just yet. I mean, if we're the train, we now see the light in the tunnel because we can see some of these things in better perspective and vision right now. So, yeah, we're getting close, but we've written on, drug addicts that have found the Lord. Almost anything you could think of, we've written about now in 35 years.
But inspirational stories about heaven's
That's
agenda.
been a big part of it. A very good friend
Yeah.
of ours who just died. He was a 13-year heroin addict, heroin addict. And he was actually asked at one point, this is in his public testimony, if he would actually be a hitman. He became a priest and he was actually a very close personal friend. We did several articles on him over the years, from bodybuilder to soul builder. And after he had his conversion, he was a volunteer with us for 5 years. Every single Thursday, he would do anything you asked. He came in our office for 5 years, did anything you asked. And he actually, in all that we had, he probably had hundreds of meals at our house. He actually entered the seminary, became a priest in 1999. And with his background, he actually, he just died actually last December of cancer that had ravaged his body. I never heard him once say a negative thing about another human being in 25 years. That is a conversion.
That's a conversion.
Never heard
God
him
bless
say a
him.
negative thing. I mean, he would make something known. He wasn't that milk toast, but he just never, he said very clearly, who am I with my background
To
to
judge someone
cast a
else.
stone
That's right.
at another individual?
Man, that's
He was
awesome.
extremely orthodox. He was very firm in his faith with his background, the way he had lived. He wasn't namby-pamby about anything. He was very strident of what was right and wrong. So it's those kind of stories that we've written about now for so long in the magazine.
Yeah, that's what I want to turn people to. So if you want to find Ted Flynn, go there, go to sign.org. The newsletter, the articles is called Signs and Wonders for Our Times. And he does speak a lot about Garabandal there, but he's going to come back on. Two fill in the blanks for you, Ted. First one, when I die, I will know my life has been a success if.
I just heard when I die. What's after that?
When I die, I will know my life has been a success if.
If you have stayed firm to the rubrics of the faith.
That's you. You will know your life has been a success.
If you actually, even better yet, if you have been obedient. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Mother Teresa, for instance, God has not called me to be successful. He's called me to be faithful. And that's the way my wife and I have viewed our own life. We haven't desired to ever be a monstrous apostolate. We do what we can handle. We try to always keep it apostolic versus 100% business, raising money through mailing lists and all of that stuff. So we've tried to just stay to the basic fundamental aspects of the faith: daily mass, daily rosary, frequent confession. But if a person has been obedient, then they will know God.
Amen. Second and last, it's another fill in the blank. Name one thing you want our listeners to do differently as a result of something they heard today. Actionable principle.
Adoration in Mass.
Amen.
God will speak to you specifically in adoration and at Mass.
Amen. Ted Flynn, you've been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to a continued relationship here and doing the second part of this show. Let the Lord continue to use you as he has been with this. Obviously, he called you to this for a purpose, and you're doing a very fantastic job of it. Where can they get your book?
Sign.org.
Sign.org. And the book again is called Garabandal, The Divine Reset, The Warning and the Great Miracle, Two Supernatural Events That Will Change the World. Correct?
That's it.
That's it.
Change the world or correct the conscience of the world.
Okay. Yeah, and
Correct the
that's
conscience of the world.
amen. All right, let's correct our conscience. For me, you guys, besides the conference I mentioned at the beginning, don't forget to go to truthspeakers.org, register to come to the conference. Also, you can find me on breakfastwithbacon.com. That's my website. Sign up to receive my newsletter. Also know that the Lord called me to save marriages for a living. If you are divorced or your spouse is having an affair and you just want to stand on your vows, if you're facing an unwanted annulment, divorce, or infidelity, contact me. I have a group of standers that you need to be a part of, and we are standing on the vows that you made at the altar, saying your marriage is indissoluble until death. It's a great community that the Lord has put together there. Also, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Rumble, YouTube, and I think I'm going to start doing X sometime soon. I think that's all I had to say for now, Ted. I think you know how I end the show, right? So we're gonna have you.
I do.
Okay.
I've got a part in it.
You got a part in it. Okay. Here's how it goes. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life.
Sunny side up.
You did it.
I was coached. I can follow. So I can follow directions.
You have a good wife.